Good morning. Welcome to the First Religious Society Unitarian Universalist in Newburyport, Massachusetts. My name is Reverend Rebecca Bryan, and I am the minister of this beloved congregation, and so glad to see you today and have us be together. We have a few different and special things in our welcome this morning. First, we're going to start with a couple of welcomes, additional welcomes. This morning, we extend a warm and friendly and neighborly welcome to the members of the Gloucester Unitarian Universalist Church who are visiting with us today while their dear minister is having a Sunday off. We have a beautiful and historic connection to this congregation in Gloucester, stemming back to the ministry of Reverend Bert Steeves. This church, not our church, but the church of our guests this morning, which was historically the Independent Church of Gloucester and the first Universalist church in America, starting in the 1960s, the church began to have a declining membership and struggling with that. And coming about 1987, the congregation was actually considering closing. At the request of a Unitarian Universalist Association staff member, Reverend Steeves agreed to work with those remaining members there in Gloucester and in helping them address their financial and organizational challenges and issues, and occasionally would go and preach. By 2001, the church was once again active, vibrant, and independent. It is a joy to welcome you all here this morning. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to Andrew Bakit, our new multimedia specialist who just started joining us this past week. He'll be working with us on creating videos and other online productions. He'll be with us in the coffee hour, and I encourage you to stop in and say hello and get to know him. Two additional invitations before we move into our worship this morning. Next week begins a 3-week series of what we call our Giving Sundays. It will be different this year, as is everything. It will be creative and fun and meaningful. The first week, next week, I'm going to be preaching on the concept of pledging. Yes, financial, however, much deeper than that. Really about commitment. What happens when we actually commit? I'm extending an invitation to you all now. If you have a minute, send me a quick email or a Facebook message private. You can actually invite me to be your friend on Facebook. I would love that. Send me a quick note. Don't worry about how well it's written, but share with me a story of when you made a commitment about anything in your life and what happened. We also will be putting together a video for our third service of all the congregants who'd like to participate and answering in 3 sentences or less what FRS means to me. So you can join on coffee hour and get recorded there or send them on in on your own. Let us shift now to worship. We are living in challenging times, and forces continue to press upon us that suggest we best live in fear, separation, and blame. Instead, this church community chooses to come together, committed to love, peace, and justice. Our core values are authentic connection, courageous action, love, spirituality, and wonder. Our mission and our invitation to all of us is, come as you are. Journey together in love. Act with courage. Transform our world. For those of you visiting today, or if you happen to be joining us for the first time, we're especially glad that you're with us. There are links that you can click on to see today's order of service. If you're on YouTube, the links are just below the live stream. Please click on the words "See More" if necessary to see them. And if you're watching from our website, there are buttons to the live stream. Every Sunday, we say that it is no small thing we have gathered. This morning, it is a particularly big thing that we have gathered, so let us give ourselves to it. I welcome one and all to our church and to our worship service. It is good to be together. And our call to worship this morning are the words of Adelfo Perez Esquiel. He said, "We know that peace is only possible when it is the fruit of justice. True peace is a profound transformation by means of the force of nonviolence that is the power of love." You are faithfully called to worship. Let's join together now in saying our chalice lighting words as Justin lights the chalice. You can find the words printed in your order of service. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together. Each week, we also light 2 candles of peace, representing 2 places on earth we lift up and remember as a sacred encounter with our world. There are untold numbers of places on earth that need peace. These 2 we especially hold close in this service and through the week ahead. After each candle is lit, I invite you to speak the words for peace in English, Arabic, and Hebrew. Peace, salam, shalom. Our first candle this morning is lit for Texas, where weather conditions of snow, freezing temperatures, and devastating ice are creating conditions unknown and devastating that have taken the lives of at least 47 people. We pray for the safety of all, for adequate emergency response, and action toward climate justice. Peace, salam, shalom. Our second candle this morning is lit for the nation of Haiti, where tens of thousands of protesters have been calling on sitting President Juvenal Moïse to step down from power when his term expired on February 7th. The president and his government, with the support of the United States and other nations, has responded with violence against the protesters and has refused to cede power. We pray for a peaceful transition of power that respects the dignity of Haiti citizens who have fought for sovereignty and independence from oppressive regimes since 1791. Peace, salam, shalom. And this morning we also light a candle of hope and remembrance in recognition of the COVID-19 pandemic, all those who are struggling for economic security, all those who are fighting for their health, and all those who have lost their lives. We will light this candle each time we worship for as long as we live into this worldwide reality. Please join now in singing our opening hymn, number 299, Make Channels for Streams of Love. You can find the words and the music in the hymns document below the live stream.
If this song is new to you, I encourage you to listen along to the first verse or just hum or ooh as you feel comfortable and join in the words when that feels right for you. Make channels for the streams of love, where they may broadly run, and love has overflowing streams to fill them every one. But if at any time we see such channels to provide, the very founts of love for us will soon be parched and dried. For we must share if we would keep this gift all else above. We cease to give
Let's join our voices now in our affirmation of faith. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with God.
From all that dwell below the skies, let faith and hope with love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung through every land by every tongue.
It is now my delight to share a video with you on nonviolent action. It was created by Kathy Desolitz and Sandra Thaxter with the support of our Director of Congregational and Community Engagement, Cynthia Walsh. In creating this video, Kathy and Sandra said this: for every justice-seeking person, there is a moment that leads to action. Who and what is that person or situation that ignites emotion? The goal of any nonviolent direct action is to find the core of nonviolence in yourself and transform that power into positive social change.
This is the time in our service when the offering will be gratefully received. The generosity of our community is an essential ministry that supports the work of the church to live out our values, mission, and ends, both in Newburyport and beyond. Each week, 50% of the Sunday offering not designated as a pledge goes to a local community partner engaged in important efforts to transform our region. The February shared collection will support the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. This coalition brings together over 90 organizations across the state, including the First Religious Society, to end the epidemic of gun violence by advocating for improved policies around gun safety and partnering with community organizations working to end violence in our neighborhoods. Below the live stream, there is a link you can click to make your donation online, or it will be in the chat on Zoom. You can also text a contribution by sending the word GIVE FRSUU to the number 73256. And of course, you can always mail a check to the church as well. Contributions from the weekly offering are down significantly this year due to our online worship format, so your generosity is especially appreciated at this time. The offering will now be gratefully given and received.
Thank you, Justin. This is a time in our service each week when we pause and lift up the joys and the sorrows of our gathered community. I invite you to share your own joys and sorrows in the chat as I read those that have been sent in advance. So if you begin sharing them now, there's this little bit of a delay, so if you do that now, they'll come through after I've finished, and we'll take time to hear each of them. This morning, we light a candle of joy to celebrate Peter Francisi's 80th birthday, which is today. Paula says that his wife says that they had hoped to take a trip as a family to celebrate the occasion, but because of the pandemic, they'll be putting that off for a while. It's something fun to look forward to. Happy birthday, Peter. We also light a candle of concern for Reverend Stan Barrett, who's recuperating at home after a successful emergency cataract surgery at Mass Eye and Ear due to complications found during an initial operation. To continue with that, Stan and Leslie share their gratitude at being so close to great medical care and their joy at being surrounded by such a caring community at FRS. We also light a candle of joy this morning and of gratitude from Paula Esty, who writes, "My heart overflows with gratitude and love for this church community. Your calls and cards, gifts and prayers have lifted my husband and I out of the darkness that is COVID. We are both feeling so much better, and it is in large part to what love can do. Thank you so much." And we're so glad to know that, Paula.
We are grateful with Susan Fazoli for the love and support of family and friends after her mother's recent passing from COVID-19. We are joyful with Minnie Flanagan, who shares that she is home from a wonderful month with her daughter in Florida, having barely missed a beat with FRS thanks to Zoom. We are joyful with Carol Bousquet for the ongoing small group racial justice ministry made up of members both of the Gloucester and Newburyport church members who meet Sunday afternoons as we explore how racism impacts all of us together. We share in the sorrow of Cynthia Walsh and many, many others that Sister Diane Ortiz passed away. She tried for many years to hold the United States government accountable for human rights violations in Guatemala.
we light one final candle this morning for all of those joys and sorrows that, although unspoken, are held in just as much love and care. I'm just so happy to be with you all. Won't you join me now in a spirit of prayer, meditation, and centering? Light of insight, light of love, light of healing, and of the sun, of courage, light of honesty. God of so many names and no name, may the love in all of its forms fill us now. As we mention each of these expressions of love, may a person or a situation come to the hearts and minds of those who are gathered here. As we love our friends, as we love the pets and animals in our lives, the beautiful nature that surrounds us, the sky, waters, and earth, the love of passion, the fire of taking action when you can no longer be quiet, the fire of taking action when you see something small or large that must be stood up to, the fire of community, a fire outside, in a yard, outside at a bonfire, on a beach, in a fireplace. And yes, always between those lovers, those people who see in one another something that makes them better. Love, the gentle kind. The kind when we look at a small, delicate flower and see the beauty of creation. The kind when our grandchild first wraps their fingers around one of ours. The kind when our elderly neighbor blows out a birthday candle on their cake. The kind when a friend says, "I love you." Love in all of these forms, and so many more. May it infuse each and every one of us, giving us the courage, the strength, the conviction to go on, and the wisdom and the humility to be grateful every day. Amen, and blessed be. Our reading this morning is taken from a Quaker pamphlet that was published in 1955 entitled "Speak Truth to Power." A Quaker search for an alternative to violence. I'm going to share just a snippet of what is in that. You can find the whole document online. It's quite remarkable. Our truth is an ancient one, that love endures and overcomes, that hatred destroys, that which is obtained by love is retained, but when it is obtained by hatred, proves a burden. The urgent need is not to preach religious truth, but to show how it is possible and why it is reasonable to give practical expression to it in the great conflict that now divides the world. Is there a way to meet that which threatens us without relying on our ability to cause pain to the human being who embodies the threat? We believe there is a way, and that it lies in the attempt to give practical demonstration to the effectiveness of love in human relations. If ever truth reaches power, if ever it speaks to the individual citizen, it will not be the argument that convinces. Rather, it will be their inner sense of integrity that impels them to say, "Here I stand. Regardless of relevance or consequence, I can do no other." Such love is worlds apart from the expedient of loving those who love us, of doing good to those who have done good to us. It is the essence of such love that it does not require an advance guarantee that it will succeed, will prove easy or cheap, or that it will be met with swift answering love. As individuals and as a nation, we must literally turn about. We must turn from the substitution of material for spiritual values. We must turn not only from our use of mass violence, but from what is worse, our readiness to use this violence whenever it suits our purpose, regardless of the pain it inflicts on others. We must turn about. Herein ends the reading. You're going to be preaching on nonviolence. Do you know Bayard Rustin? Justin asked me. Our director of church music's question was innocent enough. I had been a student and adherent of nonviolence for decades and did not recognize this name. He was one of the most important people in the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King's advisor in nonviolence, drawing upon the teachings of Gandhi, Justin said. I have a book. I'll bring it by church for you to read. And so began my intensive study of the life and the work of Bayard Rustin, to whom this service is dedicated. And you'll hear more about him in just a few minutes. My own attraction to nonviolence started in middle school when I began studying Mother Teresa and other religious people who were also advocates for social justice. The principles of nonviolence were and are where my religious beliefs, my spiritual experiences, and my commitment to social justice coalesce. It is deeply embedded in my own spirituality and identity. It is not always popular or easy to defend. I've had it called soft and fluffy, and when will she get beyond that love stuff? The purpose of this sermon is to explore nonviolence as an expression of love in action. It is not to push my beliefs or tout them. Last month, our worship series focused on forgiveness. Like forgiveness, nonviolence is a way of life. It is not an occasional act or decision. Today, we're going to be hearing about people, famous and otherwise, who demonstrate this way of acting and living, including Mahatma Gandhi, Bayard Rustin, and Martin Luther King Jr., a Hindu, Quaker, and Baptist, respectively. Unitarians have our own history of leaders committed to nonviolence, including Henry David Thoreau, whose civil disobedience was an inspiration to Gandhi. Reverend Waitstill and Martha Sharp, who led thousands of Jewish children to safety during World War II. And folk singer and activist Pete Seeger. We also have FRS parishioners, past and present, committed to nonviolence, including Nikki Rosen, may she rest in peace, whose beautiful picture graces the cover of the Order of Service, and who would go every Sunday, rain or shine, to Market Square to protest with nonviolence for a peace. Ken Kretsch, whose story I'll be sharing some of later in the sermon, is another person. And we have youth who are committed and combating harmful social stereotypes and norms with nonviolent measures. We cannot cover all their stories in detail, not in this brief time. I hope you hear yourself in their stories and consider how you act with nonviolence and love in your own life. Are you a proponent of nonviolence? Why or why not? If you are, what has stood in your way of learning more, or more importantly, acting more in alignment in all parts of your life? Personal, individual, family, church, community, world. What stood in your way of acting more like the teachings profess? And what do you need for support in this journey? The Albert Einstein Institution defines nonviolent action as socio-political action for applying power in a conflict without the use of physical violence. So this may be through acts of omission, right? When people don't do things that they are perhaps legally bound to do or expected to do by virtues of societal norms. Or it may be through acts of commission, where people do things that they are not allowed to do or expected to do, or a combination of both. The institution's website gives 198 methods of nonviolent action, and it is not exhaustive. It includes things like speeches, letters of support or opposition, music, art, vigils, teach-ins, boycotts, and there's so much more. They affirm that nonviolent action is not non-action, nor is nonviolence passivity or conflict avoidance. They write, it is one response to the problem of how to wield power effectively. Mahatma Gandhi, considered by many the founder of modern-day nonviolence, agreed that nonviolence is not non-action. For him, non-action, or what he called impotence, was actually worse than acting with violence. I quote, he said, "Violence is any day preferable to impotence." Gandhi drew on both his Hindu faith and the teachings of Jesus in applying his methods of nonviolence. He described Jesus, and I love this and happen to agree, he said, Jesus was the most active resistor known perhaps in history. In Gandhi's application, ahimsa or nonviolence was political, religious, and spiritual. He said repeatedly, love is the law of our being. His understanding of nonviolence was an outgrowth of his own personal spiritual journey and subsequent experience of unity within himself. Thomas Merton once wrote, and I'll quote, "One misunderstands Gandhian nonviolent action if it is seen as a way of achieving unity rather than an expression or result of having achieved unity within oneself." Which led Merton to affirm, thus the spiritual or interior life is not an exclusively private affair. Among the people who learned and applied Gandhi's understanding of nonviolence was Bayard Rustin, an African-American Quaker born in 1912. He grew up in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and was raised by his grandparents who were deeply committed to racial justice. Their home was a waypoint for many African Americans who were moving at that time from the Jim Crow South to the northern cities during what is called the Great Migration. Rustin himself moved to New York City in his early 20s, where he became a secretary of the Fellowship of Reconciliation Christian Pacifist Organization, and also the co-founder of the Congress of Racial Equality, thus formalizing his path as a noted and respected teacher and strategist of nonviolence. Rustin worked on issues of racial segregation in southern prisons when he was imprisoned, and in the military. He studied Gandhian nonviolence in India for 8 months in 1948, very soon after Gandhi's assassination, and ultimately became Martin Luther King Jr.'s most trusted teacher and confidant on these issues. John D'Amelio writes in Lost Prophet that Rustin was, I quote, "as responsible as anyone else for the insinuation of nonviolence into the very heart of what became the most powerful social movement in the 20th century America." In King, Rustin found the person who might take his own deepest aspirations and broadcast them to the nation and the world. I loved reading and imagining and understanding that when Rustin and Dr. King came together, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was just starting, just beginning to understand. His religious tradition had largely focused on freedom of one's own individual soul, right? Individual salvation. And he needed and longed for that teaching, that way to apply it to issues of social justice. And Rustin brought that to him, among others. But Rustin was a critical part. In fact, he penned King's first ever published article that ran in The Liberation in April of 1955. He was also essential in developing the strategy of the Montgomery boycott and overall to King's ascension in the public eye from an unknown preacher to a national leader in the work for racial justice. He was one of the authors, the key authors, to what I had taken our reading from this morning, the Quaker pamphlet, Speak Truth to Power. And yet, in the dozen or 13 names that are listed on that pamphlet, all white men, Rustin's name isn't listed. And it actually was by his choice, I suppose you could say. But what I mean by that is he felt he had no choice but to do that, largely because he was a homosexual. And in the mid-1900s, I find this hard to believe, and yet it is truth in our history. In the mid-1900s, it was still a crime in all 50 states in our country to be a homosexual. Now, there's much more I could share about the complicated and legendary life of Bayard Rustin. It is critical for us to tell the untold or less known stories of black people and other people of color, as well as women and LGBTQ and all others who have historically been written out of the history books. It is in itself, telling those stories, an act of nonviolence. The stories of people engaged, however, in speaking truth to power through nonviolence are alive and well in our congregation, including Kathy Desolitz and Sandra Thaxter, who made the video that we saw, who teach, along with Minnie Flanagan and Margie Powell, the Quaker Alternative to Violence program in prisons. They'll be at coffee hour and can answer questions and help you learn more about what that program is. I am inspired as well by our children and youth who are acting from love, each in their own way. I want to highlight very briefly just 2 examples of this that happened in the last week, and I share these with their permission. Let me start with one of our young adults, Matt Costello. Matt recently posted on Facebook about his experience of 12 years ago being diagnosed with a rare childhood anxiety disorder called selective mutism. His Facebook post was written to raise awareness of and take action to resist bias against mental illness. He wrote, "Even though I haven't been directly affected for years by this, it has shaped me into the person I am today. So after years of hesitation, here's my story, as candid and honest as ever. While reading it," he wrote, "it is important to remember that it could be someone else's story too." I was so proud reading that on Facebook. Another example, Sophie Himmel, age 11, had an article printed in the newspaper revealing and talking about a feeding tube, which they have had all their lives. Sophie doesn't want this to be a secret. They want people to learn more and thereby not be biased or afraid. Both of those acts, Matt and Sophie, both of those are love in action through nonviolence. And now I'll share another one, again with his permission, Ken Kretsch. His story and commitment to nonviolence touches my heart. It did the first time he told me, and each time I've asked him to tell me again. Ken was born during the Great Depression in 1933 in the coal mining region of Scranton, Pennsylvania. And as he puts it, the die was cast that he would be very conservative. In the 1960s, he was conservative, he was an engineer, married to a nurse, and they lived in Wheaton, Illinois, near Wheaton College, Billy Graham's alma mater. One summer, his wife was asked to fill in as a nurse at a summer camp in Vermont that was owned by Quakers. When they drove there, when Ken drove her there and they pulled in, he was mortified when he saw all the hippie camp counselors. And he described them in his writing and said, "They're the kind that I demonstrated against." Well, one day, while Ken was there at the camp visiting his wife, he came into the acquaintance of a young Quaker woman who was a camp counselor. The two of them fell into conversation and talked for hours. And I want to quote what Ken writes about that experience. He says, "It is hard for me to describe exactly what happened that afternoon. Neither she nor I remember any specifics, but the result for me was dramatic. I suddenly saw the Vietnam War in a different light. I understood the meaning of the Quaker belief of that of God in all of us, that all human beings have the essence of God in them. And so, how can we kill, disrespect, or denigrate them without doing the same to God? I understood," he writes, "that there was and is discrimination in society against women and blacks. I understood that being a Christian was not about isolating myself in a nice church in the suburbs. It was not only about providing mercy, but working for justice. I realized that protest against the government when you believe it is wrong is not just a right, but an obligation." End quote. Ken and his family returned to Illinois, a changed family. They began to speak out against the war, communing with people they had previously spoken out against. Ken was called a communist, chastised by his pastor for suggesting in his Sunday school room that Martin Luther King Jr. and Moses had a lot in common. So years later, and not so long ago, at the encouragement of a friend here in FRS, Ken reached out to that Quaker counselor to tell her what had happened from that conversation decades earlier. It turned out that she remembered Ken, but she didn't remember anything about their conversation. She cried when he told her the influence she had had on his life, saying, quote, that she had no idea that she had ever had an influence on anyone. None of us really know the effect of our lives and what it has on other people, certainly not fully. The effects of our life live on for good and ill. They live on in our families, our friends, our neighbors, and people we will never know. None of us will ever be perfectly nonviolent. In fact, Gandhi said, there will never be an army of perfectly nonviolent people. It will be formed of those who will honestly endeavor to observe nonviolence. One doesn't follow this course for worthiness or popularity or acclaim. You do it because who you are depends on it. Bayard Rustin and the other authors of Speak Truth to Power quoted Rufus Jones in that pamphlet, and this was what Rufus said. It takes immense faith to swing out thus from the main social current of the world on a unique venture, to make an experiment in the practice of love when everybody else insists that nothing else will work but force. Will we choose love? Will we turn and love? Will we, my friends? Amen, and blessed be. And we're going to join now in our closing hymn, which is actually number 114, forward through the ages, verses 1 and 2.
Forward through the ages in unbroken line, move the faithful spirits at the call divine. Gifts in differing measure, parts of one accord, manifold the service, one the sure reward. Forward through the ages in unbroken line, move the faithful spirits at the call divine. Wider grows the vision, realm of love and light. For it we must labor till our faith is sight. Prophets have proclaimed it, martyrs testified, poets sung its glory, heroes for it died. Forward through the ages in unbroken line, move the faithful spirits at the call divine.
So again, I invite everyone to stay and join us for coffee hour, where you can meet and speak with the folks that made the video, or meet Andrea, or get your 3 sentences about what you love about this community recorded. And please send me your stories of when you made a commitment and what happened. Let's join together now in our unison benediction. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. My friends, in each of us there resides the truth that we are beloved, that we are a child of this universe, that we are special and unique, and at the same time, we are a part of an integrated web of life. That means we are part of something so much greater than ourselves. We are part of all that connects us. We are not unique, and yet we are. And in that place of unity is love. Go in peace, my friends, and return again in great joy. Amen, and blessed be.